Hey guys, we are back in video 2 talking about homeostasis. We talked last time about organ systems. So we mentioned organ systems with paradigm shifts, small to big schema, the organ systems. And now we're on this middle section. And so class will be on Monday on this. That's the part of the textbook, if you want to go there, that's the part of the textbook that covers what we're covering today. So we're talking about homeostasis. Homeostasis you've probably heard about in biology before. We'll get to Sir Craig if you've been taught Sir Craig, but basically homeostasis means balance, proper balance inside your body. So that's why I have this picture of this bongo board is what I grew up with. My dad bought my brother and I a bongo board, and I'll do a demonstration with that on Monday. So the basic outline is the first half we're talking about homeostasis, the basics, positive and negative feedback loops, positive versus negative feedback loops. And we'll talk about two different types of homeostasis today, blood temperature and blood oxygen. And then I'll have you do a little pre-writing assignment over the 8 things that we need to do to maintain homeostasis. So eight life functions that help us maintain homeostasis. So the big organizing theme though is still homeostasis. Again, homeostasis, you might think of homeo as self, as home. Probably the easiest way just from the word. Stasis, putting him in cryostasis is like freezing someone and having them live forever, which isn't possible yet. Can't get to absolute zero. But it basically means home and same. The more technical term is equilibrium. You're keeping things inside of yourself at equilibrium. Or the more common term is just balance. There's a proper balance here. As things go up, other things, this kind of domino effect happens and it's brought back to level. So again, as you get out of balance, there are certain mechanisms in your body all over the place that bring it back to balance so that you can live and survive. Again, you might have heard of this in terms of Sir Craig. We teach this in general biology. I love it. Named after Daniel Craig, spelled differently. But you might remember that S is stable internal environment. A synonym of that is homeostasis. Probably the most important definition of maybe the most important letter in terms of a characteristic of life. These are 8 letters that help you see what do all living things share in common. The first one is all living things have to have a stable inside, a homeostasis. So that's what we're talking about today. So this balance beam, I would draw this little balance beam in your notes. Don't write it word for word, summarize. So again, as you get out of balance, there's a stimulus that produces a change. There is a receptor a lot of times in your skin, but other parts of your body too, like your kidneys, your brain can receive stimuli. So you have that receptor that senses the change. That goes back to your spinal cord in your brain. So that's your control center. So again, you receive a stimulus, you go outside and it's cold. That is sensed in your skin and in your brain through your blood. So that's in your brain is the control center. And then the response out is going out to your muscles to shiver. So the effector is like the output to say, how are we going to get this imbalance back to balance? So you have a receptor that senses it, process in the brain or spinal cord, your control center, and then the action, the effector. And that's a response to return it back to equilibrium. So that's the goal. This balance beam also has a bottom side that does the same thing. This is just now a stimulus that lowers it. And there's a receptor, control center, and an effector that would raise it back up to equilibrium. So that's the basics. And then for each one of these, there's a negative feedback for and an organ system for. So the negative feedback is always seen right here in the middle. It's usually the amount of something in the blood, like it might be the amount of calcium or oxygen or the temperature of your blood or the pH of your blood. So that's the negative feedback for, can always be seen in the middle part of the balance beam. And then I'm curious as we go through, I'm going to have you guys say, all right, what organ systems are involved? The last lesson, the organ systems are probably the hardest part of that lesson. There's 11 organ systems. So I'll have you practice which organ systems are involved in any homeostasis balance beam. So that's what we're going to go through. That is negative feedback. So if I go back, that is when you have an imbalance and then it reacts the opposite way negatively. So negative just means opposite. You have a stimuli and then you go back to normal. So that's a negative feedback loop. The other type of feedback loop to maintain homeostasis not nearly as common, is a positive feedback loop where if you get off kilter, it's going to go even more and more and more and more and more that way. So one example would be when a baby's being born, the mother's body senses the baby's head pushing against the cervix. That nerve impulse is sensed by the brain, so you have a receptor and a control center. The brain stimulates the pituitary gland to release a hormone, oxytocin. So this is your effector going out and stimulating more things. More oxytocin, so it's secreting oxytocin. That oxytocin is carried to the uterus, and that oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions and pushes the baby towards the cervix. So the oxytocin causes contraction of the uterus, and that in turn causes the baby's head to push more against the cervix, which stimulates more stimulation of the brain, more oxytocin, and gets more and more and more and more and more until finally the baby comes out. So it's a positive feedback loop. It gets more and more and more. It's like a cascade effect. When you kick a stone off the top of a mountain, there's a rock slide, more and more and more. That's a positive feedback loop. It doesn't go back to balanced. So any kind of analogy I make with a balanced board is a negative feedback loop. And oxytocin I'll use as an example of a negative feedback loop. And there's lots and lots of negative feedback loops, and there are only a few in your body that are positive feedback loops. So we'll talk about blood oxygen, and we'll talk about blood temperature on this video. Just thinking of this in normal daily terms, how do you learn to talk well in front of people? I am personally a self-loather. When I screw up in front of people, I think about it and think about it. So I worry about the past, what I've done poorly in the past, and I dwell on that. My wife likes to worry about things in the future, about what's coming up, so we're very different kinds of worriers. So one way I learn, probably the primary way, is when I screw up, I think about it. So by negative feedback, by this kind of dread I get by screwing up, I've learned what not to say slowly. Still lifelong journey working on that, though. I don't know if you guys are like me. But you might be someone who likes to receive praise, to say when you do a presentation, you get a feedback to say, wow, this part was really, really good. So keep on doing that. That's kind of an example of a positive feedback loop, reinforcing something positive. How do you know when to stop eating? I think this is a good example of negative feedback loop. You receive a stimulus that your stomach is getting full. Oftentimes that means you should stop. I ate the biggest burrito from Senior Sam's one time, and my body's telling me that I'm full. I'm beyond full, and it's sending me the signal to stop, and I didn't stop. But I ate the whole thing. So now I've told you about the milk challenge and my biggest burrito challenge. There's other parts to me besides just eating. So that's a negative feedback loop. When you get stimuli that you are full, you should stop eating. Oftentimes a positive feedback loop, though, in contrast to that, would be it tastes good, and so I want more of that taste, and I have even more of it and even more of it. So you have a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop kind of competing when you eat. How do your teachers give you feedback? That's a lot like talking well. Do they mark things wrong, or do they tell you what you're doing well? There's different ways of this playing out in our daily life. And hopefully there's a balance of both. It takes longer to do positive feedback, though, for students. Okay, first one, let's jump in. This is the first negative feedback loop that we're going to talk about. I challenge you actually to say, this is negative feedback for what? Where do you look on this balance beam for what is being balanced in equilibrium in your body? And if you're thinking about going to this middle balance beam here and saying, oh, it's body temperature, that's perfect. So if I ever ask you, what is this negative feedback for? Always just look to the board part. It's always labeled on there. Most of the time it's in the blood. So this is normal body temperature as measured in the blood. And we'll talk about organ systems in a second. So let me describe this. Actually, pause the video. See if you can make sense of this illustration in the video. See if you can see what's happening with the receptor, the control center, and the effector. So hopefully if you've done that, you see that this is the positive side of body temperature, blood temperature. So your body temperature is increasing. So what was normal is now increasing. So this is like you being outside right now in the heat or exercising or getting nervous. There's increased body temperature. So your hypothalamic set point, which means that the normal set point in your hypothalamus in your brain is the receptor that senses the temperature in your blood. So temperature affects my skin and my body. That eventually warms up my blood, which travels to my brain, this little blue spot right here, the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus we'll learn about later this year. I got all excited about it and started talking all about the hypothalamus, so I'm going to cut this short. So hypothalamus is the receptor and it's the control center. So it's the receptor in your brain, and it controls the output of how your body's going to get back to equilibrium. So the heat loss center in the hypothalamus is stimulated. So your hypothalamus is starting to want to lose heat. You do that in two ways. Your sweat glands are activated, and that perspiration, that sweat, is vaporized by body heat. And when that water evaporates, then heat is pulled with it in a really efficient way. So sweat is incredibly important. But to get the hot blood there, your blood vessels, these little capillaries, which are just the marriage between an artery away from your heart and a vein to your heart, there's these little capillary beds that are tiny. So this is an artery right here, this is a vein, and there's a marriage between the two. And those dilate, those get bigger, so they get flushed with blood. That's why when you exercise, you have red cheeks. When you get embarrassed, you flush, and so this heat is radiating out. So the heat gets to the edge of your skin, and then the water, when it evaporates, sucks the heat out of your bloodstream, which is really neat. So that's the effector. This is the receptor and control center. This is the effector. And then because of that, because that heat is radiating out, radiating is a strong word. I would write that down. Heat radiates out of your skin. The blood temperature goes down back to normal, and you've maintained homeostasis. So I would stop and review that, see if you can walk yourself through that upper part of the balance. Okay, now once you've done that, once you guys have reviewed the upper part of the balance beam, I encourage you guys to think about which organ systems are involved, in this homeostasis balance beam. So you might look at this part and think back to the last lesson on which of the 11 organ systems are involved here and which 2 are involved here. If you're thinking brain, you're thinking nervous system, that's great. You're right. So nervous system. The skin, do you remember what organ system the skin was? It was the integumentary system. And since these are capillaries, that would be your cardiovascular system. So there are 3 different organ systems involved in maintaining blood temperature, which is awesome. This is the bottom part of the balance beam. So again, I challenge you to pause the video and see if you can interpret where the receptor is, where the control center is, where the effector is, and which organ systems are involved. So again, just to walk through this, not to take too long, the blood cools, and so the hypothalamic set point, the blood is actually cooling and lowering. And so that activates the heat promoting center, and that sends 2 responses. Last time, the blood vessels were dilating and closing down so that you weren't losing heat, or that you were flushing the. I'm sorry, it was the other way. It was dilating. Sorry, it was dilating, and so the blood rushed out to the surface of your body so you can radiate out. Now you're getting cold, so you actually want to keep the heat. So you want to pull the blood away from the edge of your body. So your fingers and toes will turn blue or purple, possibly get hypothermia if you don't have blood flow to those areas for too long. Your fingers and toes can actually die because of lack of blood. So those capillaries are constricting, and you're not having blood flow. And you want to generate heat, so you want to prevent heat loss out of your blood, and you want to generate heat. Best way to do that in your body is to shiver and actually have that generate heat, so that heat is radiating out from your muscles out into your blood. And that increases the set point back into equilibrium, and you maintain homeostasis. Organ systems involved, pause it, see if you can quiz yourself. Really the same, almost the same as last time, nervous system, cardiovascular system, and now this is the muscular system. And I think I'm going to skip this for this video. We'll do that in class. So now the next part of the video, and I'll have you do a little pre-writing assignment, is to write about the 8 life functions. And I want you to write an argument on which of these functions you want to give up or lose. So which of these 8 life functions, reproduction, irritability, digestion, growth, excretion, maintaining boundaries, movement, and metabolism, which of these 8 life functions would you give up if you had to choose to give up one? And this is the same kind of format as all the argument stuff you've done last year, and I'll review that in a second. Again, for me, as I go through it, trying to move these letters around in a way that makes sense. Ridge, and then 3 M's, so M cubed, ridge m cubed helps me remember the 8 life functions. I'm just thinking through why choose ridge. Ridge is actually defined, if it pulls up here, ridge is defined as like an elongated crest, a range of hills, a really narrow pathway is like a ridge. So you need to maintain these life functions in order to survive. You really don't have a lot of fluctuation. You're kind of walking on top of that ridge to be able to live. So maybe that's a way to remember it. Ridge m cubed. Again, I challenge you to come up with a better acronym than me. So what I want you to do is do a pre-writing assignment. Here's the 8 functions. I'm okay if you don't take formal notes on this. You can actually not know all of them very well. You might just know a few of them to do this writing assignment very well. So for the next test, this writing assignment is really all I expect. So I want you to know a few of them in depth, but not all of these. This is in the book. You don't have the book yet. So here is a scan of the book, which you can pause and read. I think I would rather have you do that than just reading it out loud to you. It starts here in maintaining life with these life functions, goes down here, maintaining boundaries, movement. So pause that if you need to read it. And then it goes responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth, and it ends there. So that's where I want you to stop. So pause that and read that. Again, with that in mind, I want you to see which of these is the least important. If you had to give up one of them, which one would you give up? I believe argument, and we're going to focus on argument even in anatomy physiology class, because learning how to make an effective argument is probably one of the most important things in a liberal arts education. Across any subject, core learning, core reasoning, critical thinking should be shaped by reason and argument. So this is a cool quote by a book. This is not actually Socrates. This is like a fictional Socrates who travels into the future to reason about a subject, abortion. So here's an argument I'm giving. I'm going to highlight some of the things I see. I have no counterclaim or counter evidence or counter reasoning. So I want you to eventually include that in your writing. But let me read through this and then I'll highlight the areas. You can skip this if you're really good at argument. My 1-year-old daughter Florence is obviously less human than my 3-year-old cat. So there's my claim. I'm claiming that this is true. So that's in purple. When dropped, my cat's reaction time trumps that of my daughter. There's no denying a sharp contrast in cognitive speed. Also, my cat will find food if she's hungry and my daughter won't. The cat is well beyond eating dirt. Isn't it true that a cat's mental capacity and resourcefulness outdistances that of an infant? Lastly, Florence won't readily flee from danger, but her feline counterpart most assuredly will. In sum, humanity is evident in the cat, but not the 1-year-old. So for me, I actually had this not underlined at all. So my cat's reaction time. So I think reaction time is kind of an argument, a piece of evidence. So that is what I'd say is the evidence, not really scientific quantitative evidence, just an argument. And this would be my reasoning. So I'm trying to back up my reason. So when dropped, the cat's reaction time. So I said cognitive speed and reaction time. I'm explaining what that means. Also, my cat will find food if she's hungry. My daughter won't. So that's my evidence. That's my green. And then I explain that a little bit here. So that would be in blue. That's my reasoning. Talking about hunger. Mental capacity and resourcefulness. I think mental capacity is kind of a re-summary of that previous argument here. And resourcefulness is another reason, kind of a summary of my argument here, my second one. And then I say, lastly, Florence won't readily flee from danger, but her feline counterpart most assuredly will. In sum, humanity is evident in the cat, but not the 1-year-old. So that's another line of evidence, is fleeing from danger, for me, was a criteria for being a human. You cannot buy that criteria. It might be a bad argument, but that's what I'm making. I don't really have a lot of reasoning there. Why fleeing from danger is an example of humanity. And then this is my summary. This is my conclusion. And I would better would be right here, I should say. And someone might disagree with me and say this, and this would be their evidence and reasoning behind that. And so that would be a much better essay. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're making those arguments with evidence, with claims, evidence, reasoning, conclusion. And I also want to have you have a counterclaim in there, like I was talking about. So that's what we're doing. So I want you to try and take these 8 life functions, and say, okay, I think that one is the least important, and this is why. Give a claim, evidence, reasoning, and then say, this is what someone else might say. Someone else might say that irritability is the least important, and then this is why, and then end with a conclusion why you still think you're right. So spend, I would say, 20 minutes doing a pre-write. Don't spend a lot of time. We'll do a little more in class also. All right, thanks, guys.